Please like the video and share it so that it reaches many more people and you get sawaba, or rewards from Allah. This could be a sawabe jariyah or continuous reward for you long after you are gone.
Eclipses. Volume 2, Book 18, number 150. Narrated by Abu Bakr. We were with Allah's apostle when the sun eclipsed. Allah's apostle stood up dragging his cloak till he entered the mosque. He led us in a 2-rakat prayer till the sun, eclipse, had cleared. Then the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "The sun and the moon do not eclipse because of someone's death. So whenever you see these eclipses, pray and invoke Allah till the eclipse is over." Volume 2, Book 18, number 151. Narrated by Abu Mas'ud. The Prophet said, "The sun and the moon do not eclipse because of the death of someone from the people, but they are 2 signs amongst the signs of Allah. When you see them, stand up and pray." Volume 2, Book 18, number 152. Narrated by Ibn Umar. The Prophet said, "The sun and the moon do not eclipse because of the death or life, i.e. birth, of someone, but they are 2 signs amongst the signs of Allah. When you see them, offer the prayer." Volume 2, Book 18, number 153. Narrated by Al-Mughira bin Shu'bah. The sun eclipsed in the lifetime of Allah's apostle on the day when his son, Ibrahim, died. So the people said that the sun had eclipsed because of the death of Ibrahim. Allah's apostle said, "The sun and the moon do not eclipse because of the death or life, i.e. birth, of someone. When you see the eclipse, pray and invoke Allah." Volume 2, Book 18, number 154. Narrated by Aisha. In the lifetime of Allah's apostle, peace be upon him, the sun eclipsed, so he led the people in prayer, and stood up and performed a long qiyam, then bowed for a long while. He stood up again and performed a long qiyam, but this time the period of standing was shorter than the first. He bowed again for a long time but shorter than the first one. Then he prostrated and prolonged the prostration. He did the same in the second rak'ah as he did in the first, and then finished the prayer. By then the sun, eclipse, had cleared. He delivered the khutbah, sermon, and after praising and glorifying Allah he said, "The sun and the moon are 2 signs against the signs of Allah. They do not eclipse on the death or life of anyone. So when you see the eclipse, remember Allah and say takbir, pray and give sadaqah." The Prophet then said, "O followers of Muhammad, by Allah, there is none who has more ghaira, self-respect, than Allah, as he has forbidden that his slaves, male or female, commit adultery, illegal sexual intercourse. O followers of Muhammad, by Allah, if you knew that which I know, you would laugh little and weep much." Volume 2, Book 18, number 155. Narrated by Abdullah bin Amra. When the sun eclipsed in the lifetime of Allah's apostle, an announcement was made that a prayer was to be offered in congregation. Volume 2, Book 18, number 156. Narrated by Aisha. The wife of the Prophet, p.b. U.h. In the lifetime of the Prophet the sun eclipsed and he went to the mosque and the people aligned behind him. He said the takbir, starting the prayer, and prolonged the recitation, from the Quran, and then said takbir and performed a prolonged bowing. Then he lifted his head and said, "Sami Allahu liman hamida," Allah heard him who sent his praises to him. He then did not prostrate but stood up and recited a prolonged recitation which was shorter than the first recitation. He again said takbir and then bowed a prolonged bowing but shorter than the first one, and then said, "Sami Allahu liman hamida rabbana walak alhamd," Allah heard him who sent his praises to him. "O our sustainer, all the praises are for you," and then prostrated and did the same in the second rak'ah. Thus he completed 4 bowing and 4 prostrations. The sun, eclipse, had cleared before he finished the prayer. After the prayer, he stood up, glorified and praised Allah as he deserved, and then said, "The sun and the moon are two of the signs of Allah. They do not eclipse because of the death or the life, i.e. birth, of someone. When you see them, make haste for the prayer." Narrated Az Zuhri, I said to Ursa, when the sun eclipsed at Medina, your brother, Abdullah bin Az Zubair, offered only a 2-rakat prayer like that of the morning, Fajr, prayer. Ursa replied, yes, for he missed the Prophet's tradition concerning this matter. Volume 2, Book 18, number 157. Narrated by Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, on the day when the sun Kasafat eclipsed, Allah's apostle prayed. He stood up and said takbir and recited a prolonged recitation, then he performed a prolonged bowing, then he raised his head and said, Sami'a Allahu liman hamida, and then remained standing and recited a prolonged recitation which was shorter than the first. Then he performed a prolonged bowing which was shorter than the first. Then he prostrated and prolonged the prostration, and he did the same in the second rak'ah as in the first, and then finished the prayer with taslim. By that time the sun, eclipse, had cleared. He addressed the people and said, the sun and the moon are two of the signs of Allah. They do not eclipse, yakshvan, because of the death, or the life, i.e. birth, of someone. So when you see them, make haste for the prayer. Volume 2, Book 18, number 158. Narrated by Abu Bakr. Allah's apostle said, the sun and the moon are two signs amongst the signs of Allah, and they do not eclipse because of the death of someone, but Allah frightens his devotees with them. Volume 2, Book 18, number 159. Narrated by Amra bint Abdurrahman. A Jewess came to ask Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, about something. She said to her, may Allah give you refuge from the punishment of the grave. So, Aisha asked Allah's apostle, would the people be punished in the graves? Allah's apostle, after seeking refuge with Allah from the punishment of the grave, and thus replied in the affirmative. Then one day, Allah's apostle rode to go to some place, but the sun eclipsed. He returned in the forenoon and passed through the rear of the dwellings of his wives, and stood for the eclipse prayer, and the people stood behind him. He stood up for a long period and then performed a prolonged bowing which was shorter than the first bowing. Then he raised his head and prostrated. Then he stood up for the second rak'ah for a long while, but the standing was shorter than that of the first rak'ah. Then he performed a prolonged bowing which was shorter than the first one. Then he raised his head and prostrated. Then he stood up for a long time but shorter than the first. Then he performed a prolonged bowing but shorter than the first. Then he raised his head and prostrated and finished the prayer, and then delivered the sermon and said as much as Allah wished. And then he ordered the people to seek refuge with Allah from the punishment of the grave.